What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Echoes of Elsewhere, the podcast where we dive into the hidden, the forgotten, and the downright mysterious corners of our world. I'm your host, Courtney Autumn, and today we're diving into the basics of urban exploration through a little Q&A. Whether you're a seasoned explorer or someone who's only dabbled in the Instagram hashtag, covering the basics of Urbex is not just a good place to start, but something I personally never get tired of listening to or learning about or talking about, but I never get tired of anything related to exploring, so that might just be me. Nevertheless, I reached out to some of my favorite fellow explorers and asked them to submit some of the most common questions they've been asked over their time exploring. So I'll try to give you the best mix of answers, personal stories, and maybe a little advice with a dash of caution. Without further ado, let's dive into this in-depth look at Urbex. So let's start with the basics of all basics with question number 1, which is, what exactly is urban exploration? Urban exploration, or Urbex, is the act of exploring man-made structures, usually abandoned ruins or hidden parts of the urban environment. Think abandoned hospitals, houses, tunnels, theme parks, towers, basically any place that's been left and forgotten over time. It's part adventure, part detective work, and part documenting, for most of us anyway. Question number 2, how do you find locations to explore? This, I think, wins as the most common question. I'm just going to put that out there. But my answer is research. And research can be anything from Urbex forums to Google Earth and maps, local history blogs. There's literally an entire website dedicated to Urbex and how to do it. Google is your friend. Also, sometimes even word of mouth, but really that's kind of seldom, to be honest. You can find spots from random locals usually, but other urban explorers are not going to generally share locations with anyone. And if they do, they have a very valid reason for trusting someone with that information. So either way, try to remember doing your research and dedicating most of the time to that. That's my best piece of advice for finding locations and for exploring them, really. But that brings me to question number 3, which is urban exploration legal? A short answer, often and no. It is not legal. But longer answer, it depends. Trespassing laws vary by location, so always do your homework, your research. Like I said, the golden rule of Urbex is don't break and enter. If a place is locked up tight, it's locked up for a reason. With that said, and I'll say this lightly, a window and a door are the same thing to me. So whether it's open or broken, if the getting in part doesn't require damaging anything, then for me personally, I'm going in. I'm the go in and unlock the front door for the other people to get in type of girl. So that's my take on it. Some people won't even go into a window. Some people will break a window. Some people will scale a roof, scale a building, whatever. Some explorers are crazy. I feel like I'm kind of in the middle. It really also depends on what the place is. If it's a state-owned property like a hospital or a school that's really secured and locked up, I might be a little hesitant on what all I might do. But if it's just a random house and I know for sure it's abandoned, then yeah, I might do a little more to get in there. I think everybody's take on that might be different, but in the greater scheme, no, urban exploration is usually not legal. But if you do it with respect and research, then you can do it. And that's my answer. That's my final answer. Question number 4 is, what is the scariest moment you've had while exploring? Well, being that I took a very extended break from exploring and I've just kind of been sitting here watching from the sidelines, I'm just recently jumping physically back into it. So I haven't covered enough ground, I would say, to really have a truly scary experience. I will say the abandoned school, that was my first exploration that I mentioned on here, is a place that I revisited many times. And one of those times, before I even got out of my car, a random dog ran out of the school and toward my car. And then it just sat there by my door, waiting for me to get out. And I'm just like, hello? What the fuck do I do? And like a minute or two later, this guy comes out of the school, and it turns out that it's this homeless guy with his dog, and they've been staying there. So somehow I never saw him before when I explored there, but he was really chill. He was really cool. I told him what I was doing, and he kind of actually showed me some parts of the school that I didn't realize that were there. So that worked out, but it could have been a worse situation for sure. And I definitely got creeped out at first because I've never encountered anyone there. And I was a lot younger than I am now, so I was very new to exploring. It was like before Urbex was even a thing. So yeah, that was probably not really a scary experience, but it was definitely not. I wasn't expecting to encounter really anyone, but especially not just a random dog that was greeting me at my car when I pulled up. So that was an interesting time. Anyways, moving on. Question number 5, what gear should someone bring to go urban exploring? Which really is, I think, your common essentials, a flashlight, especially if you're going in the dark, but most bandos don't have power, so a flashlight's always a good thing to have. I'll go ahead and tell you guys, an iPhone flashlight's not going to cut it. I went into my last exploration completely unprepared, and I only had my phone like literally a dumbass. And yeah, it wasn't cutting it at all. So your phone, your iPhone, your cell phone flashlight does not count as a flashlight. Get a real flashlight. That's my first piece of advice. Sturdy shoes are a good piece of advice. You don't know what the foundation is of a lot of the places that you're going to go into, especially if it's a house. I mean, really, if it's anything abandoned and it's been remotely reclaimed by nature, you're probably on some fragile territory. And if you're exploring out in the woods, really in general, I think that there's not a time where you shouldn't have sturdy shoes on while exploring. So that's another good thing. Gloves for sure. A backpack, possibly a lightweight backpack. It really just depends on what kind of explorer you are and what you're going there to do. Obviously, a lot of us are going to have like cameras and equipment, maybe a tripod. It really depends. Everyone's different. But if you're just going for the sake of exploring and you just want to venture out and find a bando and see what all it's about, then I think your essentials should be a good flashlight, sturdy shoes, gloves, a backpack, a mask, definitely a mask, water, for sure. There's been people who've literally died exploring because of dehydration, so make sure you're hydrated, you got water, especially if you're going to go on a long exploration. If you're going to go travel out into the woods, you don't know how long you have to walk, you don't know how long you're going to be there, the walk back, all these things you have to factor in. If you know you're just going to like drive your car right up to a spot, be in there for 30 minutes and come out, I think that you'll be fine and you can bring less stuff. So I guess it really all depends on what kind of property you're going to, what you're going to be doing there, and all of that. I think it depends on what you should bring, but I think the basics definitely are, like I said, a flashlight, good shoes, gloves, a backpack, water, and a mask. Is there anything else? And your phone, obviously. Like, have some sort of point of contact. And always share your location with someone, especially if you're exploring by yourself. But we'll get into that. We'll get into partnering up and more of that a little later. Next question is, are there any unwritten rules in the Urbex community? Absolutely. There are many unwritten rules. Well, I guess I couldn't really call them unwritten. They're definitely written somewhere in the Urbex guide of how to do things right. Some of us don't follow it. But yes, there are definitely some unwritten rules for explorers. The first one I can think of is take only pictures, leave only footprints, which is just like it sounds. You know, a lot of it has to do with not taking things from places, whether they're abandoned or not. You shouldn't be stealing shit. And that's not to say I haven't taken stuff from bandos before, because I have, but they're simple items. You know, I'm not in there taking cash or sensitive documents or jewelry or any of that. I like to bend the rules and not break them. So maybe I'm not the explorer you want to listen to when it comes to like rules. I don't know if any explorer is. Obviously, we're not big on rules because we're out here constantly breaking them. But let me move on. Another rule, unwritten rule for Urbex that I can think of is don't vandalize. Like I said, if it requires damaging the property, just don't do it. Other explorers want to go there, whether you can get in or not. Some of us just want to see it. And if you have to damage a place to get in, or if you're just there to vandalize, like, go somewhere else. There's break rooms. Go into a break room. They'll let you be in there for an hour and you can vandalize freely. That's what you're supposed to do there. Don't go to bandos and do it. Like, we love these places. Please. Anyways, so the last rule I'll say for the Urbex community that I can think of right now anyways is don't blow up locations online. And that's because of what I just talked about. They'll get vandalized. People who are not urban explorers and just want to go ruin stuff will go out there and ruin stuff. And if we make our locations too obvious or really easy to find, then inevitably they get ruined, they get destroyed, most of the time to the point in which they have to completely be demolished. And yeah, I feel like that's just so unfair for some of us who have these places on our maps and will never get to explore them because of vandalism. It's just very senseless. And a lot of these places are historically registered. So I don't know. I don't get the appeal in being destructive. I've never really had that kind of a reflex or desire. I don't know. But yeah, so those are some of the unwritten rules in the Urbex community that I can think of. The next question, what is the coolest place you've ever explored? Which is very easy for me. It's a place I explored last month that my girlfriend named the River House. This will probably be one of my favorite explorations for forever. I discussed it on my other podcast, but I will probably come back here and do a different take on the property for this podcast in the near future. But as far as a house bando goes, that one is always going to have a pretty special place in my heart. The other one that I can think of is an old water tower I climbed that's out in the middle of nowhere, literally. I actually recently checked on maps and it's still there. So that's something that might come up on here as a future adventure because it's totally worth revisiting, and I do love a good adrenaline rush, so I definitely want to go back and climb that again. Moving right along to the next question, what is the biggest myth about urban exploration? That's a good question, actually. I think one of the biggest myths about Urbex has to be that it's super dangerous or illegal, which, like I did say, that it's not legal, so that part is kind of true. Like I said, you just have to proceed with caution, really. There's always going to be risks, but with research, caution, and respect for the space, it's not as reckless as people think. I actually, hear a lot more explorers say that they've never really encountered a lot of trouble or drama while exploring than you would think. So it can be done in ways that may not totally eliminate any risk, but you can definitely keep your exposure to it at a minimum if you're cautious and smart. The next question is, what is the creepiest thing that you've found while exploring? I always get spooked when I see sleeping bags or any evidence of recent activity in a place. In large part because the allure for me is that a place is abandoned. It's abandoned. So I don't expect or really want to find people living in there or evidence of it. But when I have, it just makes me feel like I'm invading someone's space who's currently staying there. And whether they're supposed to be or not is irrelevant, because obviously I'm not supposed to be there. So yeah, sleeping bags and like toiletry, hygiene items, stuff like that is always a little creepy for me. But beyond that, at the River House Bando that I just mentioned, there was an entire basement that was just filled with the most random shit. But some of the stuff was just straight up like, what the fuck is this? Like the random jars and bottles with unidentifiable liquids in them, and I don't know. It was weird. It was really weird. Anyway, moving on. Next question is, how do you handle running into other people while exploring? And lucky for me, I've only had the one encounter with that homeless guy and his dog at that school. But like I did then, I approach it with caution and respect. I think that's pretty universal, whether it's a homeless person or security or other explorers. I think if you're cautious and respectful, a little goes a long way. And for the most part, just stay out of each other's line of sight. It's probably like the best method or the best approach to use when exploring, especially if you run into other people. Next question says, what are the risks of Urbex? Which I kind of covered that along the way in this episode already, but there are obviously plenty of risks, from a foundation collapsing and just the structure being really fragile to hazardous materials and chemicals, wild animals, other people, security, getting lost. I think the key overall is to stay alert, and if you can help it, don't go alone, especially if you're a female. I hate saying that. It is true though. If you're a girl, if you're a female explorer, I don't recommend going alone. And that's just my take on it. That's not to say I haven't. I used to do a lot of exploring alone when I was younger. But even now I think back on that and I'm like, that was crazy. Why would I do that? So I don't know. I don't know if becoming a mom has changed my perception on things, but yeah, it's just helpful to have a partner nearby, you know, whether it's a friend or another explorer or whatever. Sometimes someone knowing where you are isn't enough. If a floor falls through or you get stuck in some weird situation, it just helps to have at least one other person there. That's my opinion on how to deal with some of these risks. But obviously there's legal risks. Getting arrested or in trouble in some way is always a risk, which leads me into my next question. Should you run from the cops if you're caught exploring? This varies so much sometimes from one explorer to the next, and I might sound crazy, but I don't think that I would run from the cops. In large part because it just pisses them off more. So if they do catch up with you, then you just made your own case worse. But when I was younger, I personally have ran from the cops before, not while exploring, totally different kind of incident. When I was a teenager, long story short, I got tased and that was that. So So I think I might have PTSD from running from cops, but I don't think I would run from cops again at all. Regardless, exploring or not exploring, I don't think I'm the kind of person to run from the cops, but I do hear a lot of explorers say that they would. So I think everyone's different there. It probably largely depends on your own personal experience with cops to begin with. So yeah, I don't foresee myself running from law enforcement anytime ever. Basically, I'm just going to let myself get arrested. Anyway, moving on. How do you prepare for an exploration? Research. Again, research the site, plan your route, research your route, and check the weather, pack your gear, tell someone where you're going, take someone with you, pack a snack, have some water, and always have an exit strategy. That most important. I think when you get there, at least for me, when I walk into a bando or when I have, especially if I've mapped it out for a while and it's like I've been dying to go here, I'm finally here, I get really excited. A whole beast gets unleashed that usually isn't a part of my regular day-to-day existence. So needless to say, I have to check myself before I wreck myself a lot of times, especially in the beginning of exploring a spot, because I get so excited that I forget to plan out an exit strategy, if just in case. It always helps to have one. That way, if you are going to run, which in hindsight, I guess I don't need an exit strategy because I'm obviously not running. Well, I am though, because if it's not a cop and like some homeless person comes after me, I'm getting the fuck out of there. I think having an exit strategy is a big part of preparing for an exploration, but it's not anything you can prepare in advance. You usually have to get to the space first, so that part makes it tricky to prepare, but it's just something to, take a mental note of it, so that way you don't wreck yourself like I just said. Anyways, we're almost done. Next question is, can you recommend any urban exploration creators? For sure I can. The first that comes to mind is the No Tracers podcast. Kay Onagonio is a literal Urbex queen, and she does music too. She's just a fucking badass, like for reals. So be sure to check out the No Tracers podcast because it is really the best. Chasing Bandos podcast is another Urbex podcast I listen to with Greg Abandoned. It's really good, and he's just really so much fun to listen to. Abandoned Southeast, Leland Kent. He is an urban explorer who's been documenting for like 10 years or close to that, and is a great storyteller, writer, photographer, just a truly great explorer. So definitely recommend going through his blog, his website. I will link it in the description along with the others that I just mentioned. Some Instagram accounts to follow that I absolutely love are Urbex Georgia Jen, Jason Baker Photography, I think is his handle. Backroads to Abandoned is amazing. I love her content, and she just seems like a really fun person. And of course, Big Banks. I love him. If you are in the Urbex community, you absolutely know who I'm talking about. If not, highly recommend looking up Big Banks. Probably best to look him up on YouTube. He does these full-length walkthroughs of these abandoned places from really all over the world. It's really amazing, the stuff he does. But his YouTube channel is just filled with amazing spots, amazing content. Go binge watch it. Yeah, those are a few explorers that I love, that I adore, that I worship. And I hope you love them just as much if you don't know of them already. And last but not least, what is your number one tip for a first-time explorer? I think my number one tip would have to be respect the location. Every wall and window always has a story to tell. So don't add to its deterioration, its destruction, and don't risk more than you're willing to lose type of situation. So that's my greatest piece of advice, is to just do everything with respect in mind and have fun more than anything. Exploring is supposed to be fun, you know. There's a reason why a lot of us love it as much as we do and why we are so drawn to it. And it is a lot more than just having fun, but Urbex is fun. It's therapeutic, it's fun, it's just a magical hobby to have, and it's a magical thing to get into. And yeah, like I said, I could talk about this shit all day, so I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to end this episode. But thank you to my fellow explorers for submitting your frequently asked questions. And thank you to all of you for joining me on this dive into the art of Urbex. If you've got more questions or want to share your own Urbex stories, hit me up on Instagram at Urbex Echoes. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review for the podcast. It helps more explorers find the show, which is the goal. That's it for today. Until our next adventure, keep exploring the allure and the abandoned, the beauty of decay, and the echoes of elsewhere.